I take my dog Rocky for a walk every night after work. He always waits near the door when I'm gone, and always keeps an eye at the window for me. On this particular day, I arrived back from work, went inside, and gave Rocky a big pat and some food like I usually would. For whatever reason, Rocky happened to be really excited this time. I could tell he couldn't wait to go on our routine nightly walk. We would usually leave the home to go on our walks at around 8 p.m., around the time it got dark out, and this day was no different. As we began our walk, Rocky was ecstatic. He was a Labrador after all, but I didn't want him keeping me up at night because I had an important meeting the next morning, so I decided it would be best to tire him out and go for a long walk. I'm talking like almost 2 hours long. We were in a part of the neighborhood I wasn't too familiar with, but I eventually found a walking trail that led into a forest preserve. At this time of night, there wasn't anyone else out, and as I continued walking through the preserve with Rocky, I thought to myself how peaceful it was. It was a rather spacious path, with woods on either side, and leaves scattered all over the dirt trail. It meant that whenever Rocky and I would take a step forward, there were loud crunching and rustling sounds. Rocky took the lead, tugging on the leash with more force than usual, still excited, but even more so now we were exploring uncharted territory. Eventually on the trail, we passed this public restroom. It was one of those ones with no lock or door in it, and just a windy walk-in entrance. It was perfect timing, because I really needed to go for a leak anyway, so I decided to tie Rocky's leash to a water fountain that was around the back corner of the building, out of sight from the main entrance, and facing large trees and bush. As I walked inside, there was one dimly lit overhead light, and the rest of the bathroom was practically pitch black. So with minimal visibility, I then put my hands out, in an effort to try and look for a stall I could use. I was fumbling around and wasn't having any luck, and then all of a sudden, Rocky started going crazy over something. I could hear him barking extremely loud, and the sound echoed throughout the entire bathroom, reverberating around the walls. He would only really do that when he saw another dog or animal, sometimes people but less often. At this point I still really had to go, so I kept pushing my way forward, and for the time being I tried to ignore Rocky's barks. After about a minute or so I finally managed to find a bathroom stall, and opened the door to carry out my business. But before I did, I made sure to lock the door behind me. I was just finishing up, having likely only been in there for around 2 minutes max, when all of a sudden one of the bathroom taps turned on. This startled me. My heart was now beating extremely fast. I could feel the pulsations throughout my chest. How was this possible? Maybe it was just a leaky tap, I thought. All of these things were running through my head, so I decided to put my ear to the door to see if I could hear anything. As soon as I did, I quickly realized that the tap wasn't turned on by itself, because I heard faint footsteps coming from directly in front of my stall. Now I was really scared. Why would someone keep the tap running on full blast while trying to tiptoe their way around the bathroom? Something just didn't feel right about the whole situation. I could still hear Rocky barking from outside, but barely, because the sound was now muffled from the water gushing out of the tap. Whoever it was then walked past my stall and opened up one of the other doors. Prior to this, I had no idea there were any other stalls, because it was too dark to see anything. The person then closed that door, and then opened another one, and another one. Then it finally clicked in my brain. They were looking for me. I knew I didn't have long until they would try and open my door. I had to act fast. I didn't have time to think. I then burst out of the door and bolted as fast as I could towards the dimly lit overhead light. I could now see the windy entrance. I sprinted through it, and finally got the hell out of that creepy thing. It was now dark outside too, but because Rocky was still barking aggressively, I managed to stumble my way back to him. I immediately started fiddling with the leash, trying my best to untie it, but my hands were trembling in fear. I couldn't get it undone. I then finally managed to untie the leash, but as soon as I did, I heard loud footsteps approaching me from behind. I turned around, only to be greeted by a man in a full black outfit and hoodie. He immediately charged at me, but as he did, Rocky bit him on the leg. The man screamed in agony and dropped to the floor, and I took it as an opportunity to pull Rocky off the man, and we started sprinting back down the forest preserve. We eventually made it out of the preserve, and finally back home. I gave Rocky a massive hug, and treated him to a large bowl of beef and pork, his favorite. Looking back now, I'm so grateful I had Rocky by my side. I realized that all of his barking was him trying to warn me. He must have seen the man, or known something was up. So this happened to me a couple years ago, when my now husband and I were living in a townhouse in a pretty decent area. My husband was working a third shift as a corrections officer at a local correction facility, and I was working as a waitress and bartender. It was an unusually warm night for mid-March, so I took full advantage of it and decided to take my husband's Alaskan Husky on a quick walk around the neighborhood near a complex. We get to the end of the street that leads into the complex we live in, and across the street is a Marathon gas station. I notice as my dog Luke stops to relieve himself that there is a guy across the street at the gas station with a case of beer in his hands. I have my phone out texting my friend, and I then look back up and notice the same guy was now near the stop sign, also relieving himself on the sign. I felt really awkward and instantly put my phone away and led Luke down the street on our path. At this point, I think the guy noticed us, and he crossed the street to where Luke and I had just been. I heard him walking a few feet behind me, and so I just kept my head down and stared at my phone, with Luke glued to my hip. After about 10 seconds, I hear the guy's steps getting closer and closer to me. Luke eventually realizes that there is someone behind us, and he stops in his tracks. Mind you, he is a big dog compared to my 5'2" self, but I can handle him pretty easily, and he is very well trained by my husband. But I noticed his ears were perked up, and his tail was also straight up. I was glad he was aware of his surroundings, but I still wanted to keep moving away from this guy. I just got a weird feeling about the whole situation. This guy finally catches up to me, so I tighten my grip on Luke's leash and pull him closer to me. I then step onto the grass and allow the guy to pass, while keeping Luke by my side. However, the guy never passes, he stops with us. When I thought the guy was about to pass, I stuttered out some small apology, because Luke was pulling on his leash a little bit to investigate this guy, and most people did get intimidated by him, just by his size. The guy then stops and stares at me for a minute, long enough for me to smell the cigarettes and booze rolling off him, and to notice he's probably in his mid to late 20s, dark hair, scruffy looking, and just dirty. He smiles and finally seems to notice Luke trying to get at him, and asks, "Cute dog. What's his name?" Instead of making up my name, I said Luke. He then proceeds to ask me if he can pet my dog, and before I can even give him an answer, he leans down and starts petting Luke's head. Luke did not like that. Luke jumped at him as a warning, and the guy backed up chuckling. I quickly apologized and mentioned that he was very protective, and then made up some lie that he was my dad's former canine unit. Instantly I saw the guy's face change. I don't know what to call it, but he looked a little bit put off by it. He then asked me what my name was, and I gave him a fake name. He then asked if I lived around here, and I said I was just visiting a friend of mine for the weekend. He then made a sudden step towards me, and I'm not lying when I say I've never heard my husband's dog growl in the 5 years I've been with him. But the sound that came from my dog sounded like something from a nightmare. Luke's hair was spiked up on his spine, and he was throwing himself on his back legs and kicking from his legs at the guy. He had put himself completely between myself and the guy and was snapping at him. This freaked the dude out so much that he stumbled backward, nearly dropping his beer. He quickly said, "Well, have a nice night, cutie," and stumbled off down the road. When I say my heart was pounding, it was deafening. I grabbed Luke's leash so hard and sprinted between the buildings until I finally got back to my townhouse and locked all the doors and collapsed by the front door. Luke was in my face the whole time, kissing me and whining. This dog is the sweetest and most gentle creature I've ever met, and hearing him growl and seeing the way he did made me realize that I needed to get the hell out of that situation, and fast. I used to own the most sweetest natured, loving, and loyal golden retriever, who loved nothing more than people and food. About 2 years ago, we were both walking back from a long dog walk through some woods on the outskirts of town where I live. On the edge of these woods is a large housing estate that has a bit of bad reputation, and a supermarket that I was going to stop off at on our way home. To get to the supermarket, we had to walk through this path that was quite isolated, and then underneath an underpass. Along the way, there were a few discarded McDonald's food wrappers that my dog tried to get at, being a typical golden retriever. We eventually got to the supermarket, and I left him outside in the shaded area. Now, I've done this countless times in the past 10 years I've owned my dog, and I've never had an issue. I took his lead off and I took it inside with me. I've always done this in the past 10 years I've owned the dog, and my reasoning is because I thought if he had no lead on him, no one could drag him away very easily. I only bought 1 or 2 things inside the store, so I was gone for maybe 5 minutes max. As I was paying, I just had this gut-wrenching feeling that I had to get out there quickly, or something was wrong. I literally ran out of the store and found my dog was gone. The car park was completely empty, and it was a boiling hot day. There wasn't any people around to ask if they had seen him though. As this supermarket was on top of a hill, I had a really good viewpoint. I suddenly saw a flash of gold, and I knew it was him. He was moving through the path, heading towards the woods where he had walked through earlier. I ran after him, thinking he had gone back to eat a food wrapper that he sniffed up earlier, so at this point, I wasn't panicking too much. I got to the food wrappers, and there was no sign of him. That's where panic set in. I started screaming his name, and I could hear his panicked howling and barking come from the underpass that led to the back of the woods. I started running, and I finally reached the entrance to the back of the woods. There in the middle of the clearing was my dog, with a rope around his neck. Surrounding him was around 5 or 6 teenagers, who all looked like trouble, all male, about 15 or 16 years old. 2 of these kids had their smartphones in their hands filming. Another one looked to have some sort of large aerosol can and a lighter. Another one, some sort of sharp-bladed object. They were all laughing, yelling, and jeering at him as one of these kids was prodding him with some sort of metal pole. I started yelling and screaming at them to give my dog back. That took them by surprise, so my dog managed to break free and ran towards me. It sickens me to think about what these creeps were going to do with my dog. Being a short female, I wasn't going to stick around there to see what happened, so I grabbed my dog and we both ran for it. I've never forgotten myself for allowing that to happen to my dog, so I don't make the same mistake again. I've agreed to never leave my dog unattended, no matter how quick I think it's going to be.